Why is it that the limbs on the original Bunjie are just fine after 12 seasons with that crossbow? But on the other hand, why is it that the limbs on Bunjie Jr. broke after just a few seasons? And how long can we expect the limbs on Bunjie III to last? That is this series of videos from Death by Bunjie. All over Facebook forums related to crossbows, we see broken limbs and hear about broken limbs. You've seen them on YouTube, and a poll here on YouTube that I ran shows that 20% of you friends of Bunjie have personally experienced limb breakages. So it's something to be concerned about. It's a thing, right? Last year, personally, right here in the kingdom of Bunjie, we experienced our first limb breakage at the worst possible time, on the eve of the third ever Death by Bunjie meet and greet.
It was the loudest sound I have ever heard a crossbow make.
Tell us what happened when you were doing it.
So I was cocking it, and it got up to about here, a little over half probably, and it just popped all at once. And like I felt a piece hit me in the shoe or something, but it was really, really loud. And like I yelled a little bit and nobody heard me, but yeah.
Did you swear?
No.
Of course you didn't swear.
No, I didn't, but
it's one of those things that started me thinking, man, how can I avoid this problem in the future? I decided to sit down and start researching this topic and learn more about crossbow limbs, why they break, but also what we can do as crossbow hunters to help prevent that. One of the people that I reached out to learn more about this topic was our friend Darren Cummings. Darren is an engineer, and he has his own YouTube channel if you're interested, Hunting Science Explained.
To bring in my old climber stand.
You might remember that Darren joined me last year for a video about deer jumping the string. Great video. If you haven't seen it, go watch our video on that topic.
One of the most important things to remember about physics is that you can't create energy, you can't destroy it. It always just goes from one source and it gets transferred into another. So when you're cocking your crossbow, whether that's a crank, whether you're using the ropes or if you're just manhandling it, but all that energy from your muscles that you're putting into, right, the food you ate turns into the strength of your muscles. And then you pull that string back up. Those limbs are storing all that energy. It's just sitting there coiled up, ready to go. So once you go to pull the trigger and all that energy lets go, it all has to go somewhere. Now, it'd be awesome if every bit of that kinetic energy, every foot-pound ended up in that bolt. And if it did, you'd have a completely silent release. There wouldn't be any energy to make any sound. There wouldn't be any energy for anything other than to propel that bolt downrange and hit your target. That's unfortunately just not the way that things work in the physical, real world. The energy you put into it, it's got to dissipate that. It has to go somewhere. We can't just destroy it. We can't say we got the 40% we wanted into the bolt, and with the rest of it, it's just going to disappear. It's got to go somewhere. That energy is going to go into a couple different things. Typically, whenever you're wasting energy, it's going to go into either sound or heat. So for a bow and arrow or a crossbow, any piece of archery equipment, the worst thing in the world for us is that noise, right? That vibration. The problem is that vibration is basically dissipating that energy over time.
I also reached out to Mark Beck. Mark is a crossbow design engineer.
I was a crossbow designer for the last 15 years.
He was actually instrumental in designing the Faradyne Axe 440. Remember that crossbow? I did a video on it last year when we were looking for a successor to Bunjie. The Axe 440 was one of the crossbows that we looked at, and I can tell you we're going to do a little bit more on that crossbow down the road. My nephew went out and bought one of those. It's pretty interesting. But I had a chance to talk to Mark about the industry and about limb breakages specifically.
Even when you're firing a crossbow that's got the proper arrow weight in it, there's leftover energy, obviously. And
That you usually hear in vibration. The energy is actually directed back into the system. So when the limbs move forward, the cables pull on the cams. The cams are taking up the string. And at some point in time, that comes to a dead stop. That energy had to go somewhere. And it just picked on the weakest link. Now, usually, designers will try to make your strings and cables that weak link. So that if you blow a bow up, chances of the only damage being done is a broken string or cable.
Oh, okay. To save the rest of the components.
To save the rest of the components. Because it's taking a hard hit. You know, it has nowhere else to go except back into the system.
Yeah, dissipating that energy is really what causes the fatigue failure. There's a couple different ways that materials tend to fail. Overstressed, it's too much load under one particular event and it breaks. The failure that you can get from a single event, right? Let's not even considering fatigue. You have a brand new bow, you take it out and shoot it, and it explodes. Well, we know one easy way to do that is to dry fire it, right?
You heard that, didn't you? I just dry fired this, right? That's horrible. That's embarrassing. It's awful.
100% of that energy has to be absorbed by the limbs of that bow, and that's why they explode. They're not made to do that.
A gentleman called and said, I blew my bow up. I said, send it to my attention overnight, but I want everything. I want cocking sled, I want the arrows, I want the whole package. He goes, arrows? What's he want the arrows for? He goes, I don't know. Maybe there was an issue with the knock. We have no idea why this blew up for you. You know, so we want to look at all the components. And he goes, well, I didn't even use the arrows.
I've actually dry fired the original Bunjie 5 times over the course of these last 12 years, but the limbs are still going strong. So user error alone, well, that doesn't explain all limb breakages.
And then there's fatigue. And fatigue means you never really put it under a load that should break it, but because it's been cycled so many times, it basically, like in a metal, will develop little microscopic cracks that you can't even really see. And there's a structure to the way that metal the atoms fit together. And it basically what happens is you get individual breaks in there between the atoms, and due to that, over time, it becomes weaker.
Now that makes sense to me. We've all taken a paper clip or a piece of wire or a spoon or something and just keep bending and eventually breaks.
The limbs are made of fiberglass. If they were aluminum, that sort of fatigue failure is pretty straightforward. It's very well understood. Metal is, for the most part, really easy to work with and make consistent, the material properties. Composites, carbon fiber, fiberglass, these sort of things, they're very difficult to make perfectly consistent. And it's just because of the way that they're made.
When I started back late 2007, we would just get plates of carbon material, and we would machine the belly or the compression side, you know, the inside of your limb. And then we would cut 4 limbs out of that plate. However, they do laminate. Some of the fancy things that are going on with laminated limbs that help stiffen surfaces and so on is really interesting.
And with fiberglass, you'll have your glass, a layer of glass. Typically, they'll try to get them all lined up in the same direction, the little glass fibers, and then they'll put resin on it. And then they'll repeat that to make it to the width that they want, or the thickness they want.
How many of them use laminates and how many of them use blanks like we're talking?
Well, that's hard to tell right now, because once they're powder coated and decorated, you don't know until you sand them down. Some of the bigger companies may use both. They may use heavy laminated limbs or a laminated limb for the higher end bows, and then just use the regular blanks or raw material for maybe their big box store bows.
If you want to hear my entire interview with Mark Beck, Check out Talking with Bunjie, my podcast, on deathbybungie.com or in the podcast app of your choice.
While it's not as well understood as for metals, it definitely composites like that and fiberglass, they can fail in fatigue. So that, you know, and it's kind of the same sort of thing. So between the layers over time, you get little breaks in the resin. And after a while, you get enough of those, and that load you put it under suddenly is enough to break it, even though on paper, it shouldn't be enough of a load to break it.
If you take fiberglass with linear fibers, okay, and you bend it, relax it, you bend it, relax it, bend it, relax it, you're going to crack it, okay? Those cracks, if it's bent and relaxed and bent and relaxed, do not link up. It's wearing itself in.
David Wilkins of Wyvern Creations up in Lee, New Hampshire, took time out of his busy schedule to talk to me about crossbows and limb breakages. Death by Bungie is not sponsored by anybody. That is not changed. But I can tell you that I do frequently go to the Wyvern Creations website to look over their catalog. They can sell you a crossbow, various packages that they customize. They also have their own set of custom arrows called Dragon Claw arrows, if you're interested in playing around with those. And who isn't?
It's like if you took a piece of wood and go, it's going to break. But if you go, you can gradually get to do it. Okay, great. Same thing happens with fiberglass. It said, so what you're doing is you're taking these brand new limbs, you're 6-8 times maybe, and then you're going, and you're sitting there with it. And all these micro cracks line up. Now you get the edge splinters and the individual little things popping up.
And if you look at your the pictures you sent me, this is exactly what it looks like. It basically delaminated. So what happened was it wasn't the fibers that failed, it was the resin that holds them together.
Now let's take your micro, for example. When the manufacturers start to make these bows smaller and smaller and smaller, they have to have, it's just a whole different nightmare to make a limb do something at that size and still perform like a nice wide long bow.
Crossbows today in this modern world are built right on the edge of what the crossbow technology can offer. Manufacturers are trying to give you the best bang for your buck. They're giving you the fastest, smallest, lightest crossbow that you can get for your money. That leads into next week's episode of Death by Bungie, the next episode in this Breaking Limbs series. That episode, we'll discuss the ultimate reason why crossbow limbs break. You don't want to miss it. Make sure you subscribe, and until that time, all hail Bunjie.